Welcome. My name is Trenessa Sidney. I am a Housing Program Specialist in the Housing Voucher Management and Operations Division in the Office of Public Need and Indian Housing. Today I will be presenting PHA 101, a guide for COCs, understanding PHA programs and policies. Upon completion of today's webinar, you will be able to understand the core functions of a public housing authority, also known as a public housing agency, know more about the public housing and housing choice voucher programs, understand PHA policies relevant to homelessness, such as preferences, admissions, and terminations, including where PHAs might have flexibility to make these policies conducive to serving the homeless. And finally, identify potential opportunities for partnership. Before we jump into our overview of public housing agencies, it should be noted that HUD uses the terms families and households interchangeably. Both families and households can include single individuals, households made up entirely of one or more adults, and families with children. So whenever we say families or households, remember that this can include single adults as well. A PHA is any state, county, municipality, or other government entity or public body authorized under state law to administer a housing or rental assistance program. PHAs receive funding from HUD with the goal of providing safe, decent, and affordable housing to low-income households. Each PHA reports to a Board of Commissioners. The board is responsible for voting on certain actions or decisions made by a PHA, such as making significant changes to the PHA's administrative plan, which may include the implementation of a preference or setting aside voucher budget authority for special purposes. When developing a partnership with a PHA, it is important to understand that there are different types of PHAs. While all PHAs share the same goal of providing safe, decent, and affordable housing to low-income families, not all of them achieve this goal in the same manner. There are some PHAs that are public housing only, which means they only administer the public housing program and may administer one or more of public housing's boutique programs, such as the Resident Opportunity for Self-Sufficiency or ROSS program. Section 8 only PHAs administer the Housing Choice Voucher program, but may also administer one or more of the boutique programs under HCV, for example, HUD-VASH or the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, also known as FSS. Combined PHAs administer both public housing and HCV and may administer several boutique programs in order to assist families in their communities. Moving to work or MTW designated PHAs are allowed certain regulatory and fiscal flexibilities in how they administer their programs. The Moving to Work program is a demonstration program for PHAs that provides them the opportunity to design and test innovative, locally designed strategies that use federal dollars more efficiently, help residents find employment and become self-sufficient, and increase housing choices for low-income households. Some flexibilities may include what is counted as part of a family's annual income or when the PHA conducts an annual re-exam. For example, an MTW PHA may conduct a family's annual re-exam every 2 or 3 years for those that are on a fixed income. Please keep in mind that MTW PHAs are allowed certain regulatory flexibilities. Non-MTW PHAs do not share these same flexibilities. So it is important to talk to your PHA partners about its programs and each program's requirements. To find out if there is an MTW PHA in your area, you may visit HUD's website for a list of the 39 MTW designated PHAs. PHAs may administer certain HUD-funded programs, including public housing, Housing Choice Voucher Program, including PVV, which is a component of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, HOPWA, also known as the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, and they may also administer grants awarded for community revitalization or supportive services. PHAs may also administer state or local government-funded housing programs. The Public Housing Program is a project-based program, which means that the assistance is tied to the unit, not the family. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, on the other hand, is a tenant-based program, which means the assistance is tied to the family, not the unit. Please keep in mind also that not all PHAs administer all programs, so I reiterate to talk to your housing authority regarding to the types of programs that it may administer. For a list of housing authorities, you can visit HUD's website on the link provided. This is a list of some of the responsibilities all PHAs have when administering a housing program. PHAs must have established policies for how it carries out these programs and how they carry out the responsibilities in its administrative plans, or ACOPs, which I will discuss in just a second. PHAs are responsible for managing waiting lists, determining an applicant's eligibility for the program, and in the case of public housing, the PHA also determines an applicant's suitability for tenancy. PHAs are responsible for ensuring housing is safe, decent, and sanitary. They calculate a participant's income and rent, and they also conduct program termination and eviction actions. So now you have a good idea of what a PHA is, its primary responsibilities, the types of PHAs, and the types of programs a PHA may administer. We will briefly discuss a PHA's administrative policies. Regardless of the type of PHA with whom you wish to partner, it is important to understand a PHA's policies and procedures for the different programs that it may administer. A PHA's administrative plan and ACOP, also known as an admissions and continued occupancy plan, are public documents, and most PHAs post their admin plans and ACOPs on their websites. You may also contact the PHA directly to obtain a copy. The PHA administrative plan, or ACOP, covers certain topics for administration of the program, such as how a PHA determines income and rent, how a PHA administers a waiting list, how it selects participants from its waiting list. It also covers preferences adopted by the PHA, as well as grievance procedures. Policies for administering the PHA's Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program are found in the PHA's administrative plan. Likewise, policies covering the PHA's public housing program are found in the PHA's ACOP. We will now review the public housing and housing choice voucher programs. HUD's public housing program is a project-based program, meaning, once again, the assistance is tied to the unit, not the family. It is made up of physical housing units that are owned by the PHA and are generally operated by the PHA directly. Public housing properties come in many shapes and sizes and can range from groups of large high-rises to groups of townhouses to single units that are scattered throughout a neighborhood or town. In the public housing program, approximately 1.2 million low-income households are served. HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Program is a tenant-based rental assistance program. It is the federal government's major program for assisting very low-income families, the elderly, and the disabled. The HCV program is administered by 2,400 PHAs, which serve approximately 2 million families. Participants are free to choose suitable dwelling units that meet program requirements and their housing needs in the private market, meaning that participants are free to choose units that may be or may allow them to be closer to work, schools, or medical facilities, so long as those units meet program requirements. This slide outlines the very basics of the public housing process for the applicant and the housing authority. We will go into some more detail on a few of these processes later in the presentation. First, interested applicants apply to the public housing program and are placed on the PHA's waiting list. The PHA maintains applications and waiting lists and can have waiting lists set up in one of two ways. The most common way a housing authority sets up its waiting list is to allow families or applicants to apply to one central waiting list that covers all of the PHA's properties. This is known as the central waiting list. The second way a PHA may set up its waiting list is where each PHA property has its own waiting list and applicants apply directly to particular sites or properties. This is called site-based waiting list. After the PHA receives the application, the PHA determines whether the applicant meets income and other basic eligibility criteria, and also whether the applicant meets other suitability criteria. and screens for additional criteria like criminal history and housekeeping. Applicants that are accepted into the public housing program are then offered a unit and execute a lease directly with the housing authority. The lease spells out the terms and conditions of the tenancy, as well as the tenant obligations. The PHA is responsible for maintaining the housing in a safe and sanitary condition, periodically reviewing tenant income to adjust rent as appropriate, and ensuring that tenants abide by terms of the lease. The Housing Choice Voucher Program works very similar in the beginning to the public housing program, whereby the applicant applies to the housing authority directly. One difference is while the housing authority for its public housing program may have a site-based waiting list for its different properties, the Housing Choice Voucher Program does not have a site-based waiting list because families can use the vouchers in the private market. The PHA selects a household from its waiting list and determines the household's eligibility for the program, which means that the housing authority reviews the family's income and criminal history. What the housing authority is not required to do in this circumstance is determine suitability for tenancy in any particular unit. The PHA briefs the household about the program and issues the household a voucher to begin searching for a suitable unit. The household finds a unit, the PHAs approve the unit if it passes a housing quality standards inspection and the rent is determined reasonable. PHA then calculates the housing assistance payment, also known as the HAP, and the household share towards rent. The PHA executes the HAP contract with the landlord. The household and landlord execute a lease agreement. The PHA nor HUD is a party to the lease. The household moves in. At least annually, the unit must be inspected for HQS, and the household's composition and income are reexamined. Now we are going to dive a little deeper into basic PHA policies in the public housing and HCV programs. Many of these policies are the same for both programs, but we will let you know when there are differences. Let's begin with preference basics. Sometimes waiting lists can be long and take years to go through on a first-come, first-served basis. For this reason, PHAs are able to establish preferences for particular types of applicants that then allow them to skip ahead on the waiting list. These preferences can be broad, for example, all homeless families and individuals, or specific, one more time.
No worries.
Okay. Sometimes waiting lists can be long and can take years to go through on a first-come, first-served basis. For this reason, PHAs are able to establish preferences for local types of applicants. I'm not sure how I did that. Okay. Applicants, then okay. Sometimes waiting lists can be long and can take years to go through on a first-come, first-served basis. For this reason, PHAs are able to establish preferences for particular types of applicants that then allow them to skip ahead on the waiting list. These preferences can be broad, for example, all homeless families and individuals, or specific, as another example, chronically homeless families and individuals referred to the PHA by the local CoC. Each PHA may establish a local system of preferences for selection for households to be admitted to the program. In establishing a local preference, a PHA must determine whether and to what extent a preference is needed based on local housing needs and priorities. PHAs must use generally accepted data sources such as point-in-time data counts, census data, or a community plan to end homelessness. In addition, preferences can be established for both public housing and housing choice voucher program waiting lists but sometimes PHAs only establish them for one program or the other. Admissions basics for the Public Housing and Housing Choice Voucher Program. Applicants must be selected for admission from a PHA's waiting list. This is true for both the Public Housing and the Housing Choice Voucher Program. PHAs must determine income eligibility and verify income for an applicant. As I said earlier, PHAs are required to determine suitability for public housing applicants for tenancy. This is not applicable to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. If an applicant selects a preference at the time of admission or at the time of application, the PHA must verify that the applicant qualifies for the preference. Admissions basics continued. There are certain federal rules that prohibit admission to federally assisted housing. The majority of applicants are denied by criteria set by the PHA or landlord in certain instances, but there are a few admission restrictions that are required by federal law and regulation. Lifetime sex offender registrants, households ever convicted for methamphetamine production in federally assisted housing, and households with a member who currently engages in illegal drug use or threatening activity. In addition to the 3 other prohibitions mentioned earlier, PHAs cannot admit households evicted from federally assisted housing for drug-related criminal activity in the last 3 years. However, PHAs may make an exception in this case if the household member successfully completed a supervised drug rehabilitation program approved by the PHA, or if circumstances leading to the eviction no longer exist. For example, if a culpable family member or household member is no longer living in the household. Admission requirements that are specific only to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. PHAs are not required to screen applicants for suitability for tenancy. Landlords and owners are responsible for screening and selecting the household to occupy the unit. Landlords may consider the following factors for screening: credit history, tenancy or rental history, and caring for a unit and premises. Landlords and owners may use the same screening criteria for both assisted and unassisted tenants. So this may include contacting previous landlords and checking references. Aside from understanding PHA preferences and admissions policies, it is crucial for COCs to understand PHA eviction and termination policies so that they can not only help homeless applicants get into housing, but also stay in housing and abide by the terms of the lease and family obligations. For public housing, there are only a few instances in which PHAs are required by federal law or rule to evict a tenant, such as being a lifetime sex offender registrant. Like admissions, the majority of evictions are due to lease policies set by PHAs. PHAs may evict for serious or repeated lease violations of the terms of the lease, such as failure to pay rent and failure to fulfill household obligations as specified in the lease. The lease must describe the grounds for termination, as well as procedures used by the PHA to terminate tenancy. Like screening criteria, these policies must apply to all tenants, and PHAs may consider individual circumstances. Public housing has an eviction process that begins with notifying the tenant of the specific grounds for their termination. The PHA must give notice of 14 days in the case of failure to pay rent and 30 days or a shorter period of time in other cases depending on the seriousness of the offense. It is the tenant's responsibility to file a grievance with the PHA within the designated time frame as specified in the PHA's grievance procedures. Usually the filing is followed by an attempt at an informal settlement between the PHA and the tenant. If the tenant is unsatisfied with the outcome of the informal settlement, then they can request a formal grievance hearing. This is a hearing in which the tenant and the PHA present their respective evidence and arguments to a third-party panel or hearing officer. The panel or hearing officer's decision determines whether the PHA evicts or does not evict the tenant. During this process, the tenant has a number of rights, including the right to review all relevant documents ahead of time and the right to have an advocate or another person represent the tenant. Also, the tenant maintains the right to present their case in court regardless of the grievance hearing outcome. COCs should review the PHA lease and grievance procedure for further information on the eviction process. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, unlike the public housing program, is not required to evict tenants from their unit. Once again, HCV program participants, they have their units in the private market. So any violations of the lease is between the tenant and the landlord. However, if a family makes serious repeated violations of the lease or violates any of its family obligations, the PHA may initiate a termination action, which means that the family could be terminated from the program. A PHA must terminate or deny assistance in limited instances. Those instances are specifically the lifetime sex offender registrants, as well as the other federal prohibitions of admission. The PHA's authority to terminate or deny assistance is described in HCV programs regulations, which are found at 24 Code of Federal Regulations 982.552 through 553. The PHA may consider relevant circumstances in determining whether to deny or terminate assistance because of an action or failure to act by members of the family. Such circumstances may include mitigating circumstances related to the disability of a family member, culpability of an individual family member, or the seriousness of the case. There is a distinction in the House Choice Voucher Program between applicants and participants. HCV applicants may be denied assistance. HCV participants, meaning these families or individuals that are issued a voucher and have already executed a lease with the landlord, as well as a HAP contract has been executed. These are considered participants. HCV participants may have assistance terminated. Denial or termination of assistance may include denying listing on the PHA's waiting list, refusing to enter into a HAP contract, or terminating housing assistance payments, once again also known as HAP. There are hearing procedures. Applicants may request an informal review of certain determinations, and participants may request an informal hearing of certain determinations. It is important to note that if a PHA terminates a family's voucher assistance, the family may remain in the unit. The HAP contract is terminated, which means the PHA no longer pays the landlord a subsidy on behalf of the family. The lease is still in place between the family and the landlord. The family is responsible for the entire amount of the rent. Landlords or owners may evict or terminate an HC participant's tenancy for serious or repeated violations of the lease, violations of federal, state, or local laws that impose obligations on the tenant in connection with the occupancy or use of the premises, or for other good cause as described in the HC program's regulations. Landlords or owners must follow state and local laws that govern evictions, including notifying the tenant of the intent to evict and grounds for eviction. Now we're going to discuss partnering with PHAs. Since you now have an understanding of how a PHA works and how the programs work, you need to know how to use this knowledge if you wish to partner with a PHA. First, in developing a partnership, get to know your PHA. Visit the PHA's website, read the admin plan, and contact the PHA to discuss developing or improving your partnership. If you are having trouble contacting the right person at the PHA, such as the executive director, division directors, or program coordinators, you may contact the local HUD field office staff who may be able to connect you to the correct person or persons. You also want to move on to another step in developing partnership, which is beginning the dialogue. Identify each other's strengths and limitations. A PHA strength may include its administration of a self-sufficiency program or its current pool of local resources ready to assist homeless families. A PHA's limitation may be a statutory prohibition or a limited number of vouchers or hard units, while a CoC strength may include its ability to help an applicant get documentation, such as a birth certificate, social security card, or some other documentation needed by the housing authority in order to process the applicant successfully. In working with PHAs, you want to develop needs or asks. PHAs may know of program participants that may be interested in or in need of local supportive services. CoCs may be able to provide those supportive services for program participants. Work together to define the partnership. Like any good team, you need to define the goals of the partnership, define the roles and responsibilities for the partnership, and maintain constant communication with each other, which is very vital in trying to assist the homeless population. In seeking a partnership with your local PHA, it is helpful to consider what are some of the other possible things you may ask for, what your PHA may need, and what you might offer. For example, today we have learned about how policies related to preferences and screening criteria work generally, including what the PHA has discretion over. After reviewing your community's needs, you may ask a PHA to use some of its flexibilities to ultimately help house homeless families and individuals. In return, you should be clear about what your needs are, as well as what you can provide to the housing authority. In this case, a CoC might help the PHA throughout the application process and housing search process to reduce PHA burden, and may continue to act as a liaison between the tenant, PHA, and landlord to resolve potential conflicts before they arise. As a PHA partner, you can help PHAs demonstrate that there is a local need to create a preference. PHAs are required to assess the local community to determine if their preferences are needed or to make any other adjustments to their policies in order to assist their communities. So if you would like a housing authority to establish a preference to better serve the homeless population, you may be able to provide them with some sort of data that is reliable and valid, or be able to help them draft language that will better target the families you are trying to assist. Once again, you can provide assistance with paperwork and briefings to expedite the process and alleviate administrative burden. And you can also assist PHAs in applying for special purpose vouchers when opportunities arise. When approaching the housing authorities about tenant-based vouchers, or even this project-based voucher program, you can always continue to ask a housing authority what it needs from you and what you'll be able to provide. You may be interested in asking for reduced screening criteria, flexible intake procedures, or actual preferences for chronically homeless households. And an example of what a PHA may need: good utilization rates for its vouchers, which means it's trying to issue vouchers and utilize those vouchers in the community, which also means that the PHA is trying to reduce its turnover rate. You can also help housing authorities build strong landlord relationships. Also very similar to the roles of the PHA partner slide as well as the previous slide, the same thing applies to public housing. What are you asking for? What does your PHA need? And what are you offering? You may be able to offer advocacy during grievance procedures, as well as other on-site activities that can benefit other public housing residents. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation, and if you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact me.